Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her friends spent weekends at the mall, she was at the shooting range with her father, a retired Marine. Her hands were steady, her aim was perfect, and her determination was unbreakable. But none of that seemed to matter when she walked into the Navy recruitment office on a humid Tuesday morning in 2018. The recruiter, a middle-aged man with graying temples, looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "You sure about this, sweetheart? The Navy's got plenty of desk jobs that might be more your speed." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "I want to be a Navy SEAL, sir." The man actually laughed, not bothering to hide his amusement. "SEALs? That's a man's job, honey. How about we look at communications or administration?" Sarah had heard this response before, but it never got easier. Throughout her childhood, coaches had told her she was too aggressive for girls' sports. Teachers suggested she focus on more feminine subjects instead of her beloved physics and engineering classes. Even her own mother worried that her daughter's ambitions were too big, too dangerous, too impossible for someone like her. But Sarah's father had taught her something important during those long afternoons at the shooting range. "Precision isn't about strength," he'd say, watching her hit target after target. "It's about focus, discipline, and refusing to quit when everyone expects you to fail." Those words echoed in her mind as she signed her enlistment papers, despite the recruiter's continued attempts to steer her toward more suitable positions. The bus ride to basic training was long and lonely. Sarah stared out the window at the passing landscape, knowing that once she arrived, the real battle would begin. It wouldn't just be about physical fitness or mental toughness. She would have to prove herself in a world that had never seen someone like her succeed, where every mistake would be magnified and every achievement would be questioned. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Remember, Mija, it's not about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being the most determined." Sarah smiled, tucking the phone away as the bus pulled into the training facility. She grabbed her duffel bag and stepped off the bus, her boots hitting the pavement with the same confidence she'd carried into that recruitment office. The other recruits were already forming groups, sizing each other up, making quick judgments about who would make it and who would wash out in the first week. Sarah could feel their eyes on her as she walked past, could hear the whispered comments and barely suppressed laughter. She'd expected this. What she hadn't expected was how much it would fuel her determination. That first night in the barracks, as she listened to the other recruits talk about their plans and dreams, Sarah made herself a promise. She would not just survive this training, she would excel at it. She would prove that the recruiter who laughed at her dreams was wrong, that the coaches who said she was too aggressive were blind, and that everyone who told her to aim lower had underestimated what she was capable of achieving. The alarm would sound at 500 the next morning, beginning what would be the most challenging months of her life. But as Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, she felt ready for whatever was coming. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment, even when she didn't know it. Every rejection, every doubt, every person who told her she couldn't do it had only made her stronger. Basic training was everything Sarah had expected and worse. The physical demands were brutal, but she had prepared for that. What caught her off guard was the constant psychological pressure. The way instructors seemed to single her out, not just for being new, but for daring to dream beyond what they thought possible for someone like her. "Martinez," drill instructor Stevens would bellow across the training ground, "you think you're going to keep up with the big boys? Let's see what you got." Every exercise became a test, every drill became a chance for her to fail publicly. While other recruits got standard corrections, Sarah received lectures about knowing your place and being realistic about your limitations. The other recruits watched these interactions with a mixture of sympathy and relief that they weren't in her position. Some tried to help when the instructors weren't looking, offering quiet encouragement or sharing extra rations when she was forced to repeat exercises as punishment for imaginary infractions. Others kept their distance, unwilling to risk becoming targets themselves. But Sarah had learned something valuable from her father's military stories. The instructors weren't trying to break her because they disliked her personally. They were testing her resolve, pushing her to see if she would quit when things got difficult. Every insult, every impossible task, every moment when she felt like giving up was actually a question. "How badly do you want this?" Her answer came during the third week of training, during a particularly challenging obstacle course. The recruit ahead of her, a large man named Johnson, had fallen from the rope climb and twisted his ankle badly. The instructor was screaming at him to get up and continue, threatening him with dismissal if he couldn't complete the course. Without thinking, Sarah broke formation and helped Johnson to his feet, supporting his weight as they approached the next obstacle. "You can do this," she whispered to him. "Don't let them win." Together, they completed the course, with Sarah essentially carrying Johnson through the most difficult sections. The instructor was furious. "Martinez, did anyone tell you to help that recruit?" Sarah stood at attention, expecting punishment. "No, sir. But a team is only as strong as its weakest member, sir." The response clearly surprised him. He stared at her for a long moment before moving on to the next exercise. That evening, Johnson approached her in the mess hall. "Thanks for what you did out there," he said quietly. "Most people would have left me behind." Sarah shrugged. "That's not who I am." But Johnson's words spread through the barracks, and something shifted in how the other recruits saw her. She wasn't just the girl trying to prove something anymore. She was someone who would have their backs when things got tough. During night training exercises, they started including her in their informal strategy sessions. When someone struggled with academics, they came to her for help. When the instructors pushed extra hard, the group closed ranks around each other. The transformation wasn't immediate, and it wasn't without setbacks. Some instructors doubled down on their attempts to break her spirit. Some recruits remained skeptical of her abilities. But Sarah had found something she hadn't expected in basic training: a sense of belonging with people who understood the weight of commitment and sacrifice. As graduation approached, Sarah knew she had passed more than just the required tests. She had proven to herself and others that she belonged here, that her dreams weren't foolish fantasies but achievable goals. The real test, however, was still ahead. SEAL training would make basic training look like a warm-up exercise. On the final day, as they stood in formation for the graduation ceremony, drill instructor Stevens approached her. "Martinez," he said quietly so only she could hear, "I've been hard on you because I've seen a lot of people with big dreams and no backbone. You've got both the dream and the spine to back it up. Don't let anyone tell you different." It was the closest thing to an apology she would ever receive, and the closest thing to encouragement she had gotten from an instructor in months. As she accepted her certificate and prepared for the next phase of her journey, Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with determination. She had made it through the first test, but the biggest challenges were still waiting. SEAL training began 6 months later at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California. Sarah stood with 47 other candidates on the beach watching the sun rise over the Pacific Ocean. The instructors had made it clear from day one. This wasn't about equal opportunity. This was about finding the absolute best regardless of background, gender, or previous assumptions. The first week eliminated 12 candidates. The second week took 8 more. Sarah watched strong, confident men pack their bags and leave, their dreams shattered by the relentless pace and impossible standards. She began to understand why her father had always emphasized mental toughness over physical strength. Bodies could be pushed beyond their limits, but minds had to choose to endure. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez became her unofficial mentor, though he never showed favoritism during training. After particularly brutal days, he would find moments to offer advice that seemed casual but was clearly deliberate. "The ocean doesn't care about your gender, Martinez. It only cares if you're prepared." His words reminded her that nature itself would be her greatest teacher and most impartial judge. The underwater training was where Sarah truly began to excel. Her smaller size, which some had seen as a disadvantage, actually helped her move more efficiently through the water. Her lung capacity, developed through years of disciplined training, allowed her to stay underwater longer than many of her larger classmates. During the underwater knot tying exercise, she completed the task faster than anyone else in her class. But it was during Hell Week that Sarah faced her most serious challenge. 5 days of continuous training with a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total. Candidates were pushed to their absolute breaking point, both physically and mentally. The instructors weren't just testing their bodies. They were looking for the candidates who could think clearly and make good decisions when exhausted, cold and under extreme stress. On the 3rd day, during a particularly difficult beach exercise, Sarah began to hallucinate from exhaustion. She saw her father standing on the beach, shaking his head in disappointment. She heard voices telling her to quit, that she had already proven her point, that no one would blame her for walking away. The temptation was overwhelming. Then she remembered something Chief Rodriguez had said: When your mind starts lying to you, trust your training. Sarah forced herself to focus on the immediate task in front of her. One more rep, one more step, one more breath. She broke the hallucination down into manageable pieces and conquered each one individually. Her breakthrough moment came during a night navigation exercise. The candidates were dropped off in teams several miles from base and had to find their way back, using only basic equipment. Sarah's team included Thompson, a former college football player who had been skeptical of her abilities since day one. 2 hours into the exercise, Thompson admitted they were lost. The other team members were exhausted and beginning to panic. Sarah quietly pulled out her compass and map, using techniques her father had taught her during their hunting trips. Within 20 minutes, she had identified their location and plotted a route back to base. "How did you figure that out?" Thompson asked as they walked through the darkness. Sarah explained her process, pointing out the landmarks she had used for reference. Thompson listened carefully, then said something that surprised her. "I owe you an apology. I thought you were here to prove something to everyone else. Now I realize you're here to prove something to yourself." They made it back to base ahead of 2 other teams, and Thompson made sure the instructors knew that Sarah's navigation skills had made the difference. Word spread quickly through the remaining candidates. Sarah wasn't just keeping up. She was contributing skills that made everyone better. The final day of Hell Week arrived with a traditional ocean swim, followed by a written examination. Sarah's body was pushed beyond anything she had thought possible, but her mind remained clear and focused. As she treaded water in the cold Pacific, waiting for the signal to begin the swim, she felt a moment of perfect clarity. She wasn't the strongest person in the water. She wasn't the fastest swimmer or the most experienced candidate, but she was absolutely certain that she belonged here, that every challenge she had faced had prepared her for this moment. When the whistle blew, she began swimming with powerful, steady strokes, her eyes fixed on the distant shore where her future was waiting. 18 months later, Sarah stood in the equipment room, adjusting her gear for what would be her first real deployment. She had completed SEAL training, finishing in the top 10% of her class. The months of specialized training that followed had turned her into exactly what the Navy needed: a precision shooter with advanced tactical skills and the ability to operate effectively in high-stress situations. But despite her accomplishments, when deployment orders came through, Sarah found herself assigned to a support role rather than active operations. Her commanding officer, Captain Walsh, called her into his office to explain the decision. "Martinez, you've proven yourself in training, but field operations are different. The teams have been working together for years. Integration takes time." Sarah felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "With respect, sir, how can I integrate if I'm never given the opportunity to work with them?" Captain Walsh shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "There are protocols, Martinez. Procedures we have to follow. Your time will come." The support assignments were important work, but they kept her away from the action she had trained for. While other SEALs conducted reconnaissance missions and direct action operations, Sarah found herself analyzing intelligence reports and coordinating logistics. She was making a difference, but not in the way she had dreamed about during those long nights in training. Her teammates were professional but distant. They had heard about her training performance, but they had also heard the whispered concerns about unit cohesion and operational readiness. Some questioned whether the mission should take precedence over social experiments. Others simply didn't know how to relate to someone whose presence represented such a dramatic change to their traditional structure. Lieutenant James Mitchell was different. A veteran SEAL with 6 deployments under his belt, he had earned respect through consistent performance and level-headed leadership. When other team members expressed doubts about Sarah's integration, Mitchell listened without judgment, but always steered the conversation back to practical considerations. "The question isn't whether Martinez belongs here," he told the team during one particularly heated discussion. "She's already proven that in training. The question is whether we're professional enough to adapt our methods to incorporate someone with her skill set." His words carried weight because everyone knew Mitchell had earned the right to speak about what made an effective SEAL. The breakthrough came during a training exercise designed to simulate a hostage rescue scenario. The regular sniper was sick with food poisoning, and the team needed someone to provide overwatch from a building 800 meters from the target location. Sarah had the best long-range shooting scores in the unit, but she had never been included in this type of exercise before. Mitchell made the call. Martinez, you're our sniper for this exercise. Can you make the shot from that distance with the equipment we have available? Sarah checked her gear and calculated the variables: wind speed, target movement, and the scope specifications. Yes, sir. I can make that shot. Mitchell nodded. Then that's what we're doing. The exercise began at dawn, with Sarah positioned on the roof of a training building while the rest of the team approached the mock hostage site. Through her scope, she could see the hostages and terrorists positioned throughout the building. Her job was to eliminate specific high-value targets on Mitchell's signal while the team breached the building. Everything went perfectly until an unexpected complication arose. One of the terrorists moved to a position where he could threaten the entire team's approach route. The original plan didn't account for this scenario, and Sarah could see through her scope that the team was walking into a potential ambush. Without waiting for orders, Sarah made a decision. She adjusted her aim and took out the unexpected threat, then immediately relocated to provide continued support from a different angle. Her quick thinking and precise shooting allowed the team to complete their mission without casualties. After the exercise, Mitchell approached her on the roof. That wasn't in the plan, he said, but his tone was approving rather than critical. You saw a problem developing and solved it without being told. That's exactly what we need in someone providing overwatch. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction, but she kept her response professional. Just doing my job, sir. Mitchell shook his head. No, Martinez. That was more than just doing your job. That was thinking like a SEAL. Word of her performance during the exercise spread quickly through the unit. The other team members began including her in their informal discussions about tactics and procedures. They started asking for her input on mission planning, particularly when precision shooting was involved. For the first time since completing training, Sarah felt like she was truly part of the team rather than an outsider trying to prove herself. The respect she had earned wasn't based on meeting quotas or breaking barriers. It was based on demonstrating the skills and judgment that made someone valuable in dangerous situations. When the next deployment orders came through, Sarah's name was included in the active operations roster. Captain Walsh called her into his office again, but this time his demeanor was different. Congratulations, Martinez. Lieutenant Mitchell specifically requested you for his team. Don't make me regret approving this assignment. Sarah stood at attention. You won't regret it, sir. I promise. The deployment took them to a forward operating base in a region where intelligence indicated high-value terrorist targets were planning attacks on civilian populations. Sarah's team was tasked with conducting surveillance and direct action missions to disrupt these plans. For 3 weeks, she performed exactly as expected, professional, precise, and reliable. Then came the mission that would change everything. Intelligence had located a compound where a terrorist leader was meeting with his cell commanders to plan a major attack. The operation required a coordinated assault with multiple teams, but the layout of the compound created a significant challenge. The only position that could provide effective overwatch for all approach routes was more than 1,000 meters away, on a ridge that would be difficult to reach and dangerous to hold. During the mission briefing, the team studied satellite photos and discussed various approaches. The overwatch position was clearly critical to mission success, but it would require the sniper to operate alone for several hours in hostile territory. If something went wrong, extraction would be nearly impossible. This is a 2-person job at minimum, said Sergeant Torres, the team's senior enlisted member. 1 shooter, 1 spotter, and someone has to watch their backs. Mitchell examined the photos carefully. The ridge is too narrow for 3 people, and we need every other team member for the main assault. It's got to be a single shooter. The discussion continued for 20 minutes with various team members volunteering for the dangerous assignment. Each had valid qualifications, but none had Sarah's combination of long-range accuracy and ability to operate independently under stress. Mitchell finally made the decision everyone knew was coming, but nobody wanted to voice. Martinez, this mission requires your specific skill set. The shots you'll need to make are at the absolute limit of effective range, and you've consistently outperformed everyone else at those distances. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. I understand, sir. What's the timeline? The mission would begin before dawn, with Sarah moving to the ridge position while the rest of the team took their assault positions around the compound. She would have to remain in place for up to 6 hours. monitoring the target and waiting for the signal to begin elimination of specific targets. Only when her targets were eliminated could the main assault begin safely. That night, as Sarah prepared her equipment, Mitchell approached her privately. "This isn't just about your shooting ability," he said quietly. "This position requires someone who can make life or death decisions independently, under pressure with incomplete information. The whole mission depends on your judgment calls." Sarah understood what he wasn't saying directly. If she made mistakes, people would die. If she hesitated at the wrong moment, the mission would fail. If she was discovered before completing her assignment, the entire team could be compromised. There would be no backup plan and no second chances. The insertion went smoothly, with Sarah reaching the ridge position 2 hours before dawn. She established her shooting position among a cluster of rocks that provided concealment, while offering clear lines of sight to the compound below. Through her scope, she could see guards patrolling the perimeter and lights in several buildings. As the sun rose, activity in the compound increased. Sarah counted personnel, identified weapons positions, and noted patterns in the guard rotations. She spotted her primary target, the terrorist leader, entering one of the central buildings. Her secondary targets, the cell commanders, arrived throughout the morning for their scheduled meeting. At 1100 hours, Mitchell's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Overwatch, we're in position. Status report." Sarah scanned the compound one final time, confirming the locations of all her targets. All targets identified and acquired. "Ready for green light." Mitchell's response was immediate. "You have green light. Execute when ready." Sarah's first shot eliminated the guard in the watchtower who could have threatened the assault team's approach. Her second and third shots took out the terrorist leader and his chief lieutenant as they emerged from the building. Each shot was perfect, dropped at distances that pushed her equipment to its limits. The assault team moved fast, taking advantage of the confusion Sarah's shots had created. Within 15 minutes, they had secured the compound and captured several high-value targets alive. As Sarah prepared to move from her position for extraction, her earpiece crackled with Mitchell's voice. "Outstanding work, Overwatch. Mission accomplished." The helicopter ride back to base was quiet, but Sarah could feel a difference in how her teammates looked at her. She had proven herself not just in training or exercises, but in real combat where the stakes were life and death. Torres, who had been skeptical of her inclusion, approached her as they unloaded their gear. "That was some of the best shooting I've ever seen," he said simply. "Distance, conditions, pressure, everything was working against you, but you made it look easy." Sarah smiled, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "It wasn't easy, but it was what we trained for." That evening, Mitchell pulled her aside after the debriefing. "Command is already asking about our next mission. They want the same team configuration with you providing Overwatch." Sarah felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. "I'm ready for whatever comes next, sir," Mitchell nodded. "I know you are, Martinez. The question is whether you're ready for what comes after the missions." Sarah looked puzzled and Mitchell explained. "Success like this gets noticed at high levels. People are going to want to know how we achieved these results. Your name is going to come up in a lot of conversations." Mitchell's prediction proved accurate. Within 2 weeks of their successful mission, Sarah received orders to report to Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters. The meeting was with Admiral Harrison, one of the most senior officers in the SEAL community, and Sarah had no idea what to expect. Admiral Harrison's office was filled with photos from decades of special operations missions and commendations from grateful allies around the world. He gestured for Sarah to sit across from his desk, then studied her personnel file in silence for several long minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had seen combat in multiple conflicts. "Petty Officer Martinez, your recent performance has generated significant interest at very high levels of command. Not just Navy command, but Joint Chiefs and civilian leadership." Sarah maintained her composure, but internally she felt a mixture of pride and concern. "Thank you, sir. I've been fortunate to work with an exceptional team." Admiral Harrison smiled slightly. "Your team leader, Lieutenant Mitchell, says the same thing about you. He also says you've demonstrated capabilities that could be valuable in some of our most sensitive operations." The Admiral leaned forward. "I'm going to be direct with you, Martinez. There are people who want to use your success as a symbol, and there are others who see you as a threat to traditional methods. Neither group is necessarily wrong. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her military career. Admiral Harrison explained that her success had created opportunities and challenges that extended far beyond her individual performance. Media attention was inevitable, and political discussions about women in combat roles were intensifying. Some saw her as proof that integration could work. Others saw her as an exception that proved the rule. The question, Admiral Harrison continued, is whether you want to be a symbol or whether you want to be a SEAL. Those might seem like the same thing, but they're not. Symbols get used by other people for their own purposes. SEALs focus on mission accomplishment and team effectiveness. Sarah thought carefully before responding. Sir, I didn't join the Navy to be a symbol. I joined to serve my country and to do work that matters. If my success helps other people pursue their goals, that's good. But my priority has to be the mission and my team. Admiral Harrison nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Which brings me to why you're here. He pulled out a classified folder and opened it carefully. We have a situation developing that requires someone with your specific skill set and background. It's not a typical SEAL mission, but it has strategic importance that goes beyond normal tactical operations. The briefing that followed revealed a complex intelligence operation involving the rescue of an American diplomat who had been kidnapped while conducting sensitive negotiations in a hostile region. The mission required infiltration of an urban area where a traditional SEAL team would be too conspicuous, but where someone with Sarah's background and abilities could operate more effectively. The diplomat has information that could prevent a major terrorist attack on American soil, Admiral Harrison explained. The kidnappers don't know the full value of what they have, but they're planning to move him to a location where rescue would be impossible. We have maybe 72 hours to act. The mission would require Sarah to work with a small team of intelligence operatives rather than her usual SEAL unit. She would be responsible for reconnaissance, target identification, and precision elimination of threats during the rescue operation. It was exactly the type of high-stakes independent operation that played to her strengths. Sir, what about Lieutenant Mitchell's team? We've developed effective methods and trust that took months to build. Admiral Harrison's expression became serious. This mission requires complete deniability. If something goes wrong, the people involved can't be traced back to official military operations. Your team is too valuable to risk on something this politically sensitive. Sarah understood the implications immediately. This wasn't just about her abilities as a SEAL. It was about her willingness to operate in situations where the normal support structures wouldn't exist. Success would be unmarked and unrewarded. Failure could end her career and possibly her life. When do I leave, sir? Sarah asked without hesitation. Admiral Harrison closed the folder. Your transport leaves in 6 hours. You'll receive your full briefing en route to the staging area. Martinez, I want you to understand something clearly. This mission isn't being offered to you because you're a woman, or because anyone wants to prove a point. It's being offered because our analysts believe you're the best person available for this specific job. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and equipment checks. Sarah packed light, knowing that the mission would require mobility and concealment rather than heavy firepower. As she prepared to leave the base, Mitchell approached her with a serious expression. I heard you're getting pulled for a special assignment, he said quietly. I can't ask for details, but I want you to know that this team considers you family now. That means we expect you to come back in one piece. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. These men had become more than teammates. They had become brothers who trusted her completely. As her transport prepared for takeoff, Sarah thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From the recruiting station where she had been laughed at, through the brutal training that had tested every aspect of her character, to the combat missions where she had proven her worth. Each step had prepared her for whatever challenge lay ahead. The aircraft lifted off into the night sky, carrying her toward a mission that would test not just her skills as a SEAL, but her ability to operate independently in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. As the lights of the base disappeared below, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came before action. Whatever waited for her in the darkness ahead, she was ready. The rescue mission took place in a crowded Middle Eastern city, where Sarah spent 3 days blending into the local population while gathering intelligence on the diplomat's location. Working with 2 CIA operatives who spoke the local language fluently, she identified the building where the hostage was being held and developed a plan for extraction. The operation itself lasted only 18 minutes, but it required every skill Sarah had developed throughout her military career. Using her precision shooting abilities, she eliminated 3 guards from a rooftop position while the CIA operatives breached the building. The diplomat was successfully extracted with critical intelligence intact, and the team exfiltrated without detection. 3 months later, Sarah stood in Admiral Harrison's office again, this time receiving a classified commendation that would never appear in her official record. The intelligence gathered during that operation prevented an attack that could have killed hundreds of American civilians, the admiral told her. Your country owes you a debt that can never be publicly acknowledged. But the real reward came when Sarah returned to her team. Mitchell and the others welcomed her back without questions about where she had been or what she had done. They trusted that she had served honorably, just as she trusted them. The bond forged through shared danger and mutual respect had become unbreakable. 6 months later, Sarah received another call to Admiral Harrison's office. This time, however, the conversation was different. Martinez, we're restructuring some of our training programs based on lessons learned from recent operations. We need experienced operators to help develop new methods and train the next generation of SEALs. The assignment would mean leaving active operations and taking on an instructor role at the training center where Sarah had once struggled to prove herself worthy. It was a promotion that recognized her expertise and leadership potential, but it also meant stepping away from the fieldwork she loved. The role would involve more than just teaching shooting techniques, Admiral Harrison explained. We need instructors who understand how to build effective teams from diverse backgrounds and abilities. Someone who knows how to help people exceed their own expectations of what's possible. Sarah thought about the recruiter who had laughed at her dreams, the instructors who had tried to break her spirit, and the teammates who had eventually accepted her as family. She remembered her father's words about precision being more about focus and determination than raw strength. Most importantly, she thought about the young people who might be sitting in recruitment offices right now, being told their dreams were impossible. I accept the assignment, sir, Sarah said without hesitation. When do I start? Admiral Harrison smiled. Report to Coronado next month. Your first class of candidates will include 12 women who specifically requested the opportunity to train for SEAL qualification. They'll need an instructor who understands what they're facing. The news that women would be formally training for SEAL qualification had generated intense debate throughout the military and in the media. Some celebrated it as long overdue progress. Others questioned whether standards would be lowered to accommodate integration. Sarah knew the pressure on these new candidates would be enormous. Her first day as an instructor began exactly where her own SEAL journey had started, on the beach at Coronado, watching the sun rise over the Pacific Ocean. 43 candidates stood in formation, including the 12 women who had fought for the chance to be there. Sarah could see the mixture of determination and uncertainty in their faces that she remembered from her own first day. My name is Instructor Martinez, she announced, her voice carrying across the beach. Some of you know my background. Some of you don't. What matters is that every person standing here earned the right to be in this formation. The ocean doesn't care about your gender, your background, or anyone's opinion about whether you belong here. It only cares whether you're prepared. As the training began, Sarah found herself watching for the same signs she had once displayed. The extra effort to prove worthiness, the determination to exceed rather than merely meet standards, the resilience to bounce back from failures and setbacks. She saw candidates push themselves beyond their physical limits because they understood that quitting would be used as evidence against everyone who looked like them. During Hell Week, one of the female candidates, Lisa Chen, approached exhaustion during the ocean swim. Sarah watched from a support boat as Chen struggled to maintain her pace, clearly fighting her body's demand to quit. Instead of offering help, Sarah called out advice that echoed what Chief Rodriguez had once told her. Trust your training, Chen. Your mind is trying to lie to you. Chen found her rhythm and completed the swim, collapsing on the beach with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Later, as the candidates rested between exercises, she approached Sarah. Instructor Martinez, how do you know when you're really at your limit versus when your mind is just trying to make you quit? Sarah smiled, remembering asking herself the same question years earlier. The real limit is when you physically cannot continue, not when you think you can't continue. Your body is capable of much more than your mind believes. But you have to train your mind to get out of the way. Months passed, and Sarah watched her candidates develop from uncertain individuals into a cohesive unit. Some didn't make it through training, but those who failed did so because of performance issues, not because of bias or lowered standards. The women who succeeded did so by meeting exactly the same requirements as their male counterparts on graduation day. Sarah stood before her successful candidates with a sense of pride that surprised her with its intensity. She had helped create something new, a generation of SEALs who had trained together from the beginning, where excellence was the only standard that mattered. Among the graduates was Lisa Chen, who had not only completed the program, but had excelled in underwater operations and small unit tactics. Standing next to her was Marcus Williams, a former college wrestler who had initially questioned whether women belonged in SEAL training but had become one of Chen's strongest supporters after watching her performance during team exercises. As Sarah presented each graduate with their SEAL pin, she thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as someone fighting to prove she belonged, had become an operator who earned respect through performance, and was now an instructor helping others achieve their own dreams of service. The ceremony concluded with Admiral Harrison addressing the graduates and their families. Today you join an elite community of warriors who have sworn to protect our nation's interests around the world. You've earned this honor not because of your background or demographics, but because you've demonstrated the courage, skill, and character required of Navy SEALs. After the families had left and the formal ceremonies were complete, Sarah found herself alone on the beach where her own journey had begun. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. She thought about her father, who had taught her that precision came from focus and determination. She thought about Chief Rodriguez, who had shown her that the ocean was an impartial teacher. Most of all, she thought about Lieutenant Mitchell, who had been the first person to see her not as a symbol or an experiment, but simply as a SEAL. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Mitchell, who was now deployed overseas with a new team. Saw the news about your graduation ceremony. Proud of what you've built there. The teams are stronger because of what you've done. Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. As she walked back toward the training facility, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that day in the recruitment office, when she had been told to lower her expectations. She had refused to accept limitations that others tried to place on her dreams, had earned her place through performance rather than politics, and was now helping others do the same. The next morning would bring a new class of candidates to the beach, including more women who had fought for the opportunity to prove themselves worthy of the SEAL teams. Sarah would be there to guide them through the same challenges she had once faced, knowing that each success would make it easier for the next person to follow the same path. But for now, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah Martinez stood on the beach, where she had proven that determination and skill could overcome any barrier. She had become exactly what she had dreamed of being, not a female SEAL, but simply a SEAL who happened to be a woman. The distinction mattered more than anyone who hadn't made the journey could understand years later. When young people would ask her about breaking barriers and proving that women could succeed in traditionally male roles, Sarah would always give the same answer. I didn't break barriers. I just refused to accept that they applied to me. The only limitations that really matter are the ones you accept for yourself. Her story had become part of the legacy that would inspire future generations of SEALs, both men and women, who understood that excellence was the only standard that truly mattered. She had moved from the back of the line to the front, not because someone made space for her, but because she had earned her place through unwavering commitment to the highest standards of service and